Email came in at 4:47 on a Tuesday afternoon, and I read it 3 times before I let myself believe it. Subject line: Offer of position Regional Operations Manager. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set my coffee down on the corner of my desk. 8 years. 8 years of being the person who stayed late, who covered the territory nobody wanted, who drove 4 hours to Scranton in an ice storm because a client threatened to walk. And now it was mine. The promotion I'd been told was a few years out, 2 annual reviews in a row, a salary that would push us past 6 figures combined for the first time in our marriage, an office with a door that actually closed. I remember sitting there in the fluorescent hum of the warehouse district office park, watching the parking lot empty out and thinking, this is the moment it changes. Everything we'd been white-knuckling through, the leftover student loans, the furnace we'd been babying for 3 winters, the way I'd learned to say, maybe next year, about the things I wanted, all of it felt like it was finally loosening its grip. I texted my husband from the car, sitting down. I got it, regional manager. They want me to start the first. And then, because I couldn't help myself, 3 little hearts. I sat in that parking lot for almost 20 minutes, engine running, heater going, watching the dots appear and disappear under the screen. Appear, disappear, appear. Then nothing. Finally, just before I pulled out, cool, that was it. Cool. No punctuation, no exclamation point. The same word he'd use if I told him the dry cleaning was ready. I drove home through the gray slash of an Ohio January, telling myself he was busy. He'd been off work for 2 months, laid off when the plant downsized, restructured, he kept calling it, like the softer word made it true. Some days, he barely got off the couch. I'd been carrying us on my income alone since November, and I'd never once thrown it in his face. I figured the silence was shame. I figured when I walked in the door, he'd pull himself together and we'd order the good Thai food and he'd be proud of me, even if he couldn't say it without it costing him something. I had the whole evening built in my head by the time I turned onto our street. What I walked into instead was the living room lights off, and the blue flicker of the TV, and my husband on the couch where I'd left him that morning, and his mother sitting in my armchair with her coat still on. I want to be fair about this because I've had a long time to think about it now. My mother-in-law was never warm to me, but she'd never been openly cruel either. She was the kind of woman who complimented your cooking in a tone that made you feel sorry for the meal. 2 hours away, in a paid-off house she'd lived in for 30 years. So seeing her in my living room on a random Tuesday, coat on, suitcase, I locked the suitcase by the stairs, the big one, parked at her feet, did something to my stomach before anyone even spoke. There she is, she said, not congratulations, not even hello really. I looked at my husband. Hey, I didn't know your mom was coming. He didn't get up. He didn't look away from the TV. Yeah, so we need to talk about that. The word that was doing a lot of work, and I didn't like any of it. What he told me over the next 10 minutes, with his mother sitting right there nodding along like the chorus in a play, was this. His mother was going to move in, not for a visit, not for a few weeks. Move in. The arrangement, he explained. The arrangement, like it was a thing that already existed, a thing with a name, instead of something he was inventing as he went, was that she'd take the spare room, the one I'd painted the previous spring, and quietly hoped might be a nursery someday. And his sister would come too, on weekends at first, and then we'd see how it went, because his sister was going through a hard time and needed family around her. And here's the thing, he said. Since you're gonna be making the big bucks now, Mom can stop worrying about her bills. You cover her. It's not a big deal, it's family. I just stood there with my keys still in my hand. I asked him, and I tried to keep my voice level. I really did, whether he'd thought about asking me. Whether the timing struck him as strange, that the day I got the biggest news of my career was the day he decided to fill our house without a single word to me first. And he looked at me, Finally, and he said the thing I will probably hear in my head for the rest of my life. He said, "Honestly, I don't really care about your little promotion. This is what matters. This is family. My little promotion." His mother made a small sound, almost a laugh, and looked down at her hands. I don't know what they expected me to do. Cry, maybe. Argue. I think part of him wanted me to argue, because then I'd be the difficult one, the selfish wife who wouldn't help his poor mother. I'd be the bad guy, and he'd get to be the loyal son. I could see the whole script laid out in front of me like a map, so I didn't argue. I said, "Okay, I need to make a couple calls about work. Give me an hour." And I went upstairs. I'm not going to pretend I had a plan in that moment. I didn't. I sat on the edge of our bed in the dark for a long time, and I listened to the muffled sound of the TV through the floor, and his mother's voice, and at one point his actual laugh, easy and relaxed, like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just told the woman who'd carried him for 2 months that her life's biggest win was a little thing. That laugh is what did it, honestly, not the words. The laugh, because I realized I'd been telling myself a story for a long time. The story was, he's struggling, he's depressed, he's not himself, he'll come back to me when he's on his feet again. And the laugh told me the truth, which was that he was perfectly fine, he was comfortable. He was so comfortable in the life I was paying for that he'd invited his mother into it without thinking twice, because some part of him had stopped seeing me as a partner at all. I was the engine. You don't ask the engine how it feels about where the car is going. So I started, very quietly, to think. I want to tell this part carefully because when I've told it before, people get excited and they skip ahead, and the whole point is that I did not skip ahead. I didn't do anything dramatic that night. I didn't throw anyone out. I didn't scream. Screaming was what he expected, and I had decided, sitting in the dark, that I was done giving that man anything he expected. The first thing I did was open my laptop and look at our accounts. Here is something I'd been stupid about, and I'll own it. We had everything joint. One checking, one savings. My paycheck went in, the bills came out, and whatever was left sat in the savings we've been slowly building toward a down payment on a better house. There was a little over $14,000 in there. Money I had earned almost entirely over the last several months. Money he now apparently considered the family fund for his mother's bills. I didn't move it that night. I want to be clear about that because I talked to someone before I did anything, and I'd tell anyone in my situation to do the same. The next morning, instead of going to celebrate my new job, I called a lawyer. Her name was the first one I found with good reviews who could see me that week, a family attorney downtown, and when I sat across from her 2 days later and laid it all out, the layoff, the silence, the mother, the little promotion, the joint accounts, she didn't gasp or make a face. She just nodded and started writing. She told me some things I didn't know. She told me that in our state, money in a joint account is generally considered marital property, but that I had every right to protect my share, and that if I was genuinely worried about it being drained, I could move half, not all, into an account in my own name and document exactly what I'd done and why. She told me not to hide it, not to lie about it, just to do it cleanly and keep records. She told me that the house which we'd bought together was complicated, but that the fact that I'd been the sole income for months and would be the higher earner going forward mattered. She told me that nobody, not his mother, not his sister, had any right to move into a home I co-owned without my consent, and that my husband said I could was not a thing that held up against the actual deed. And then she told me the thing that steadied me more than anything else. She said, "You haven't done anything yet. You have options." People in your position usually feel like they have to react right now today. You don't. Slow is your friend. Slow is your friend. I wrote it on a sticky note and put it inside my sock drawer where nobody would see it. So here's what the next 2 weeks looked like from the outside. From the outside, I was a model wife who'd had a change of heart. I came home the day after the lawyer and I told my husband I'd thought about it and he was right. Family mattered and I'd be glad to help his mom get settled. The relief on his face was almost funny. His mother got warmer to me overnight. Suddenly, I was sweetheart. Suddenly, my coffee was just how she liked it. His sister started texting me little hearts. I cooked. I smiled. I asked his mother about her bridge club and listened to the answer. And every single day, quietly, I did one thing. The first day, I opened a checking account in my own name at a credit union across town, the kind of place that doesn't share branches with the big bank we used. I had my new paycheck, the very first regional manager paycheck, the big one, routed there instead of the joint account. I moved exactly half of the savings into it, 14 down to 7 on each side, and I saved the confirmation and I emailed it to myself and to the lawyer with the date and a one-line note about why. The second day, I changed the password on my work benefits portal and quietly removed him as my emergency contact and updated my beneficiary because the lawyer said to. The third day, I went to the storage place out by the highway and rented a small unit. And over the next week, I moved the things that were only mine and that I actually cared about. My grandmother's quilt, the box of letters, the good camera, my passport, the file folder with my birth certificate and my degree. Not furniture, nothing he'd notice, just the irreplaceable things, the things you grab in a fire. I told myself I was being paranoid even as I did it. I was not being paranoid. The fourth day, I found an apartment. It was a one-bedroom on the third floor of a converted shoe factory, exposed brick and a view of a parking lot and rent that I could now just barely afford on my own. I signed a 6-month lease under my name only and paid the deposit out of my new account, and I did not tell a soul. The day I got the keys, I sat on the bare floor in the empty unit and cried for about 10 minutes, and then I stopped because crying wasn't on the schedule. Through all of this, every evening I went home, and I was sweet. I want you to understand how strange that was to come from signing a lease for the apartment I'd live in alone, to walk into a kitchen and ask my mother-in-law if she wanted decaf or regular. There's a comment I think about that someone made when I first started telling this story online. They said it sounded cold, calculated, and you know what? It was. It was calculated. I'd spent years being warm and open and trusting, and it had landed me in a house I was paying for, being called selfish for hesitating to fund a woman who'd never once been kind to me, by a man who called my life's work little. I had been warm, and it had cost me everything. So yes, for 2 weeks I was calculated. I'd recommend it. The piece I couldn't control was the timeline, because the lawyer had filed, and at some point he was going to be served. And once that happened, the sweet wife was going to disappear in a single afternoon, and there would be no walking it back. So I made sure that by the time it happened, I was already gone. I picked a weekend he planned to be away. His sister had a thing in another city, and he was driving her, and overnight, and his mother was going with them to see an old friend on the way. The house would be empty Saturday afternoon through Sunday night. He told me about it himself, proud of being a good son, and I said that sounded nice and that I'd hold down the fort. The minute their car turned off our street on Saturday, I called the two friends who knew, only two, and I'd sworn them to silence, and a guy with a truck I'd hired off a moving site, and in 5 hours we took everything that was mine, the furniture I'd bought before the marriage, my books, my half of the kitchen, the half I'd brought into it. I left him the couch he loved and the enormous TV, and exactly half of everything we'd bought together, measured down to a fairness that surprised even me, because I wanted, when this was over, to be able to say I'd been fair. I left a folder on the kitchen counter. In the folder was the bank documentation showing I'd taken half, not $1 more. A copy of the lease nobody knew about, so he'd understand I had somewhere to go and wasn't bluffing. And the divorce petition, which the process server had, by careful arrangement, delivered to him by certified mail that very Saturday morning, 2 hours before he'd have any signal his world had changed. Then I had the locks changed. This is the part people always ask about, so let me be precise. I co-owned the house, which meant I had every legal right to rechange the locks, and I did it through a licensed locksmith with a receipt, and I left a key with my lawyer, not with him, because by then there was a temporary order in place about contact. The order wasn't because he'd ever raised a hand to me, he hadn't, and I won't pretend he had. It was because the day he was served, he left me 11 voicemails, and the 11th one scared me enough to save it. I slept in my new apartment that night on a mattress on the floor, with the deadbolt thrown and my phone face down, and I slept better than I had in a year. He came back Sunday. I wasn't there, obviously. But I heard about it because by then his sister had switched sides. That's a whole other story, and she told me everything, half horrified and half, I think, a little impressed. He pulled into the driveway with his mother and his sister, and a car full of his mother's belongings, because the plan, the arrangement, was that she was moving in for good that weekend. They had her boxes, they had her good lamp. They'd given notice on the room she rented, the one I later learned she'd been perfectly able to afford the whole time, and they'd put down a deposit on a storage unit for the furniture that wouldn't fit, which is its own kind of telling. They'd spent actual money setting up a life inside my house without ever once asking me. His key didn't work. He stood on the porch of the house I co-owned and paid for, with his mother's boxes in the car, and his key turned in a lock that didn't know him anymore. And he screamed. He screamed loud enough that the neighbor I'd always liked, the one who walked her terrier at the same time every evening, came out onto her own porch to see what was happening. He pounded on the door. He called my phone, but my phone went to the lawyer. He found the folder eventually through the window, sitting on the counter where I'd left it, and his sister said he went very quiet then, and then very loud again, and his mother sat in the car the whole time with her coat on, the way she'd sat in my armchair, like she was waiting for someone to bring her a life she'd decided she was owed. I'd like to tell you that I felt triumphant. The honest answer is that mostly I felt tired, and underneath the tired, very far down, something that took me a while to recognize as relief. I'd spent so long being the engine that I'd forgotten there was a person inside the machine, and she was exhausted, and she was finally allowed to rest. The divorce took 11 months. He fought it at first, mostly out of wounded pride, his mother whispering in one ear about how I'd humiliated them. But the documentation made it simple. I'd taken half, exactly half, and recorded all of it. I'd never hidden a thing. The house we sold and split, and my share, plus my new salary, was enough to put a down payment on a small place that was only mine. With a spare room, I painted a color I loved without asking anyone, and no plans yet for what to do with it except that it would be my choice. His sister and I are, strangely, friends now. She was the one drowning the whole time, it turned out, and she'd seen in real time what the family did to a woman who gave and gave. She just hadn't realized she was watching her own future until it was me. She got out too. Different story, like I said. I never spoke to his mother again. I heard she moved in with him, in the apartment he downsized to, and that the two of them are still there, and I'll be honest, when I heard that, I felt nothing at all, which is how I knew I was finally free of it. People ask if I regret being calculated, if I wish I just sat him down and had an honest fight like grown-ups. And I understand the question, I do, but here's what I've learned, and it's the only advice I'll give. When someone shows you that your biggest moment is small to them, believe them. Don't argue. Don't try to make them see you. Just quietly, carefully, on a schedule, build the door you're going to walk out of, and then walk through it before they even know it's there. I started over at 31 in an apartment with a mattress on the floor and a credit union account in my own name, and it was the richest I have ever felt. For a long time after that weekend, I kept coming back to the laugh. Not the words my husband said in the dark living room, not the suitcase by the stairs, but the sound of him laughing easy through the floor while I sat upstairs realizing he was perfectly content with the life I was paying for. That laugh taught me something I'd been too tired to see. People will treat you exactly the way you let them. And the day I got promoted was simply the day the bill came due on years of letting myself be the engine nobody asked how it felt. Everything that happened next followed a clean line of cause and effect. He decided my biggest moment was little, so he believed I'd swallow anything. His mother believed it too, which is why she walked into my home with her coat on and her boxes already packed. And because they were so sure of me, they never once imagined I'd quietly do the math, call a lawyer, take exactly half and not a dollar more, and build a door out of that house before they ever knew it was there. They built their whole plan on the version of me who argued and cried and stayed. That version was gone. The locks didn't change because I was cruel. They changed because every single choice they made pointed straight at that outcome. What I want anyone listening to take from this isn't revenge. It's three things I had to grow on the spot, fast, because I'd never needed all three at once before. The first was the refusal to lie or cheat my way through it. I took only my fair share. I documented everything. I never hid a cent. And that fairness is the reason the divorce held and the reason I can sleep. Doing the right thing wasn't weakness, it was armor. The second was learning to think instead of react, sitting in the dark and choosing slow, planning the storage unit and the credit union account and the empty weekend, treating my own life like something worth a real strategy. The third was the plain stubbornness to follow through when every day felt like acting in a play, smiling at my mother-in-law's bridge stories while signing a lease across town. Any one of those alone would have failed me. Honesty without a plan gets walked over. A plan without the grit to execute it stays a fantasy in a sock drawer. I started over at 31 on a mattress on the floor, and I've never once missed the house. What I carry now is the certainty that a person who keeps her integrity, keeps her head, and keeps moving cannot really be trapped by anyone. Not a husband who shrinks her, not a mother-in-law in a borrowed armchair, not the small frightened voice that says staying is easier. When someone shows you that your whole life is little to them, believe them the first time, then go build the door and walk through it before they even know it's open.